So this is part 2 of the conversation with Matt Bach from Pugetsystems. And in the previous part 1, we talked about the Puget bench and how the softwares, different creator softwares, utilize the hardware and some of the tips and tricks, you know, how to choose hardware. In this conversation, we're gonna go a little bit deeper into the company of Pugetsystems and how they are different from all the other SIs that are out there. And if you're a creator and you're wondering, is Pugetsystems, you know, for me, you know, should I be buying my PC from there? And even if you're not planning to buy a PC from Pugetsystems, you're still gonna learn something new today. Let's go.
Looking for a cheap way to license your Windows? Check out Hookeys through the links in the video description. Make sure to use the code TN20 to get a 30% off. Paste the license to the activation settings and you're all done. This license is for Windows 10, but you can upgrade it to Windows 11 for free. They also offer Microsoft Office 19 license. Use the same code TN20 to get a 30% off. Check out hookeys.com in the video description below.
Now, the bit where we talk about Pugetsystems, not as much as a benchmark, because there's a lot of other exciting things that you guys do that I think is worth talking about, and why is it different than some of the other SIs out there that just say, create a PC. So firstly, there is Puget LABS. Do you want to talk about that? Why is it beneficial for people, and what do they do, Puget LABS?
Under the Pugetsystems umbrella, I mean, we obviously have a bunch of different departments. You know, we have our production department, we have our consulting team, we have our support team. Our labs team is there to make sure that what we are doing as a company aligns with what reality is for the verticals that we target. So we have myself, my specialty is media and entertainment. We have now 2 people actually for AI and HPC and machine learning. We have someone who is specialized in visualization, so everything from game dev to his role has warped a little bit. It started out as game dev, and now there's like virtual production has kind of taken over that whole space. So he's handling all of that stuff. We've had people that are targeting like engineering. That's one area we are trying to fill a little bit right now. But our role in labs is keep up on the hardware. So what is Intel doing? What's NVIDIA doing? What's AMD doing? Keeping an eye on Apple, you know, obviously as well. And then what is the software doing? So what's Adobe doing? What's Blackmagic doing? And we have partnerships with all of those pretty much. Like we communicate all the time with them. But then also figuring out what are people doing in reality. So a good chunk of that comes actually through our consultants and our support teams of, you know, a consultant says like, oh, this guy's doing something I'm not familiar with. They bring us in and we get to learn about some weird new workflow, and sometimes, you know, we get to tell them like, well, hey, did you know if you did this, you don't even need a new computer? And they're like, cool. And then they come back 2 years later and buy a system anyway. Or it's just helping out like, okay, hey, yeah, that's unique. This is probably what it's going to be. Great. We also have our own budgets to go out to shows just purely to learn. So, you know, last month I was out at Adobe Max. We have a booth at Adobe Max, but that I spent a ton of time in, not really as a salesperson, but more as a, what do you do? Tell me about what you're doing. Like, what's your headaches? What's going on? And people love to talk about themselves and their work. And so it's a great way for us to make sure we're grounded in what are people actually doing in reality, not just, you know, Adobe says this should be the workflow you're doing. It's like, what are people actually doing? Like, what's your actual hurdles? With all the AI stuff, what are you concerned about? You know, what seems cool? What's threatening to you? And then, so our role is really to be the central repository of all of that stuff. And then we take all of that and we share it internally. We do training for our consultants or support team so that when someone calls up and they say, I'm working with HEVC 422 10-bit, they know what that is. You know, sometimes they might be like, I'm not super familiar with that. Let me bring in our labs guy. But usually they at least know what you're talking about, which is, I feel like a little unique sometimes with computer companies. You know, you call up one of the big guys, you just get someone in a call center who's going through a script. That's not really helpful. We do that internally. We also do a lot of that externally. We were at NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, which is like one of the biggest shows in the U.S. at least for, you know, this kind of field. I actually got to do a couple presentations there because, you know, we're always keeping up on this and we want to share it out. So we got to do that. We have a whole bunch of hardware articles. New stuff launches all the time. Very similar to the work you're doing, except we don't look as good doing it, so we keep it on text only, no video, no voices. We stick to text. And that kind of information was born out of, we need to know it from ourselves. We need to know it so that we know if we should recommend to this customer an AMD CPU or an Intel, or how much faster would this new system be for them. We need to know. But we're also very much of the mindset of, let's help the community. Let's share that information. Let's let people, look it up. Let's let them find it. One of the reasons too, again, why our benchmarks are free for public download. Part of it, I guess you could say, is a selfish business reason of someone can run our benchmark on their system and we'll be able to tell them, cool, this new system will be 20% faster. But at the same time, man, it comes up so many times where someone runs our benchmark. They come to us to talk about a new system. We tell them hey, a new system would really only be 10% faster. Is 10% worth a $6,000 investment? Oftentimes that's a no. And we would rather know that than them buy a system, get it all set up, and then it's the same as their old system. That's just a poor experience. It's going to be a refund. It's just terrible. So even that side of the business side, it's still just managing expectations, making sure people know exactly what they're getting. So that's kind of the role of our labs department. If you had to put it into one thing, it's keeping our company system integration side in line with reality and then helping the community as much as we can.
That is very unique company and very unique positioning. I personally don't know anybody that does it as in-depth as them, and probably some of the other ones who do might look at some of your information and then base their decisions on the customers just because what you've published.
Well, we know they do.
But there's a few things that you guys do a little bit differently when we're talking about creative professionals. Their systems that, some usual gaming PCs, and I think that's where my channel is different as well. Zero gaming content, all for creators or people who use this for tools, but there's a lot of people who want to build them. That's where I come in. You build it for them, but some people want to build them themselves. A lot of people have criticized me, and I believe you as well, for using air cooling in a professional workstation. They see a $15,000 or $50,000 Threadripper system with many GPUs, and they're saying, unbelievably used air cooling in there. How can you do that? It's massively going to thermal throttle. It's never going to, be able to cool that, the 280 watt CPU. And then the same for, Intel CPUs. You guys are using air cooling for all of the systems, as far as I know, I think. What is your opinion in that? Because I already guess where it's going to go, but it would be nice to hear it from you as well.
I think with anything, the first thing to make sure people are thinking about and have in their mind is that everything is a spectrum. Because air cooling could be a thermal throttle in some situations. In others, it's not. If you're building your own PC, you're probably a lot more willing to deal with little things that might come up. Whether that's from overclocking your RAM or overclocking your CPU for that extra little bit of performance. But you have to make sure you're putting yourselves in the shoes of other people as well. And for us, the vast majority of our customers fall into two categories. One, they know nothing about tech. They don't want to know anything about tech. They've got their own things that they're trying to get through, and they want to focus on what they want to do. And in those cases, they don't want to have to go into the BIOS and fiddle with anything. They don't want to, have to swap out a piece of hardware because it was pushed a little bit too far. So they want to play things safe. It's just like someone who is not interested in cars and don't want to change their own oil or anything else. They're going to be fine with it being a little bit slower of a car if it means less maintenance. Same thing. I know some people, it's really hard to imagine not being interested in computers, but there's a lot of people out there that just have no interest. So that's one. The second is people that used to build their own PCs, but they just don't have the time anymore. And same kind of thing where they're just so busy with actually doing their creative work, meeting deadlines, that in the same kind of way, they care more about uptime and reliability and it being like quiet. You can sit just like under their desk and they don't have to think about it. That's more important for them than anything. Because in the same way, like if the system goes down, if it breaks, something happens, it can cost them a lot of money. For some of our customers, a single hour of downtime can cost them $10,000. So it's like they don't care what the cost is. They don't care about single-digit performance differences. They care about reliability, number one. And so that is a big reason why we don't typically do things like a lot of the auto overclocking that a lot of motherboards do. The Intel CPUs are a great example because they have different power limits that Intel defines, P1 and P2 power limits and TOWs and all those other terms. Most motherboards like set those to unlimited by default. And so that's the reason why like you'll see Intel CPUs pulling crazy amounts of power, like really in those cases needing liquid cooling to keep them sane is because they're unlocked by default. And so we go in and on our systems, enable those power limits. And it does sometimes cause performance loss. And we have articles on that. Like when we have our 14th gen articles up, 13th gen, we had the same thing, Ryzen 7000, same thing. We had articles for all of those of, cool, here's what the performance is, like just out of the box with like this Asus or Gigabyte motherboard. We're enforcing the power limits and everything. And then we're also doing, with it unlocked, we test with liquid cooled and with air cooled. And we have performance numbers, we have thermal numbers for all of those. And for most of the workflows that people are buying these systems for, especially like Intel Core and Ryzen, following those thermal limits causes no difference in performance, like imperceptible difference. So like for Premiere Pro, Photoshop, having those things unlocked, it's just making your system louder, hotter, use more power, and you're getting no performance gain. So like for those people, it's just like there's no point. The only reason that stuff is unlocked is because like Asus wants to show that their motherboards are better than Gigabyte. And so then they all have to do that. And it's terrible for most people. So again, for most of our use cases, it's just not worth it to do that. Like there's not a performance gain. There are some Cinebench and like heavy CPU based rendering are like some of the ones where like we do see a 10-20% performance loss by doing that. But also we sell very few systems with like Intel Core or Ryzen for CPU rendering. Vast majority of our customers doing that, like that specific workflow, Threadripper Pro, Xeons, that kind of stuff. So in that mind, it's like, okay, cool. Technically, it is giving you a performance hit, but that's not like a real performance hit that any of our customers would see. Now, you could be different. Like maybe you do some of that stuff. Maybe you're a programmer and you do code compiling. That should show like a similar performance difference. So for you, maybe it is worth it to leave those things unlocked, invest in liquid cooling, an AIO or full system liquid cooling. Cool. That's just really where it comes down to. Everything is on a spectrum. It's in a range. And we talk to our customers to make sure that like it is not going to be a problem for them. It is a net positive doing it that way. AIOs and liquid coolers, that kind of I think leads into that. And why do we do all of our systems right now are all on air is because there's not a reason for our systems as they are configured to require all-in-one liquid coolers or full system liquid coolers. We are actually, I'll go ahead and share that we are considering and I'd almost say planning on offering some AIOs on some of our systems because of some of those workflows where there is a benefit. And man, wattages on CPUs are just creeping up and up and up. It's a good thing to have competition between Intel and AMD, but it also means that they're pushing the boundaries a lot. And so we're trying to be a little bit forward thinking and having that option for people. But even all-in-one liquid coolers, they are not a magic thing. They do tend to be louder. Even if it's the same number of fans as what's on an air cooler, the air coolers are buried in the middle of the system. A liquid cooler, like an all-in-one, the fans are on the outside of the system. So there's less stuff between you and the fans. They have pump noise. Some of the pumps are great and they are not very noisy, but there is some pump noise. And it's additional points of failure. That pump can fail. And man, we've done enough all-in-ones that like, yes, it is a risk. I can't give you a percent, but it's a whole heck of a lot more of a risk than like the fans failing on an all-in-one cooler or a normal heat sink, or the metal somehow breaking on a heat sink. That kind of comes back to our target customers are the people where uptime, reliability is more important than anything. And so by removing the number of things that can break is always very important.
One thing I wanted to ask you is you said that you considered going AIO in certain workflows. I'm just curious, are you considering AIO? I mean, I think you're not going to consider AIO on Threadrippers and Xeons. You're probably considering that for like Ryzen 9s and Intel Core i9s. Is that correct?
It'll actually probably more likely be on Threadripper Pro. We actually don't do too many Xeons. Xeons aren't, they're a little bit more niche right now as far as like where they're good compared to Threadripper Pro. But Threadripper
I wanted to ask about that as well, because you said Xeons. I was like, there's like that many things that they're better than like Threadripper in like all the rest of the things.
Yeah, well, start off with the coolers first. Yeah, the Threadrippers are most likely where we would be using those. Again, it comes down to use case. That is where we have customers doing, massive code compiles, CPU-based rendering. They're rebuilding Unreal Engine, the engine for Unreal, nightly or, every hour because they're a game dev studio. So that's where like you really get that heavy workflow where you do get a benefit and a need for those coolers. The other thing too is on those like Intel Core and Ryzen, temperature is a really hard thing these days because there are so many different things. Like 95 Celsius is fine. Like according to Intel and AMD and everything I've ever seen, like real data, there's not a downside. Like a lot of people like to say like, yeah, but doing that forever is going to make your system last shorter. I personally, I think kind of fall under that, area where like I do kind of agree that it's probably not great for longevity, but every data I've seen, it's fine. Two, CPUs these days, especially those consumer CPUs, Core and Ryzen, are designed to throttle. Like out of the box, they are designed to throttle. Because they have so many different things that are designed to push it as far as possible, and then they bring it back depending on what's going on. They bring it back depending on how much power your motherboard can provide, what the actual temperature limits are, whole bunch of different things. They're designed.
But they only changed it recently, didn't they? I believe it was like with 12th gen and then Ryzen 7000 when that actually changed a little bit differently, where they want to actually just capitalize all on the thermal headroom and then give you the max one, whereas previously you could actually see, oh, this CPU is running hotter than this one, the 11th gen and Ryzen 5000 where you're like, okay, this runs there and it's just going to run there, but now it just wants to get everything out as much as you've got, like as good of a cooling you have.
Yeah, well, and also too, you have fan speed throttling because ideally, like for most end users, you want those fans to be spinning as slow as possible so the system is as quiet as possible. So a lot of fan curves even now, like you're setting, it's only running at 100% when you get up to 80, 85, 90 Celsius. Most of that stuff you can configure, so it's up to where you want it to be. But so like up until that point, your fans aren't even throttling all the way up. So it's like one of those, like sometimes you don't need a bigger cooler, you just need to tune your fan profiles. What's interesting to me is that we've already had this kind of shift in on the GPU side years ago. I don't know the last time I've really seen people talk about GPU temperatures, simply because GPUs already have been doing for years now kind of what we're seeing on the CPU where, yeah, they'll go right up to that thermal headroom and then they kind of like start throttling back a little bit and like people are just used to it now. And I think we're kind of at that phase right now in CPUs where, oh man, 100 Celsius is a scary number. But when you actually get into, well, what's the performance difference of there? That's one of the reasons why when we do these power limit testing, we test with unlocked with both. We use Noctua coolers, and then with like a 2x120 or a 2x140 or whatever AIO. Almost always the difference between those is nothing. So it's like it's the kind of situation that's really hard right now because everyone wants to say you want to get as much performance as possible. You don't want to throttle. But throttling is just the reality of where we are today. And I think kind of as a tech community, I think there has to be a little bit of a shift in our thinking of throttling bad to throttling is intended and just making sure you're not throttling too much, that it is going to actually affect things in the real world beyond synthetics or beyond workflows that you don't care about.
I think you already mentioned that, but just to underline that, you know, it's probably best to hear it coming from me, but I've seen Puget Bench do extremely good job in the customer support, whether pre-purchase or after purchase. So that's like, you can hear it from anybody, and I think you can ask this from anybody who's, you know, used the Pugetsystems product, that there's incredible support for all of their customers, which, if there's anything special you can add to that, but I'm sure you agree with that.
I think that's, I think it's pretty safe to say that, in especially in the creative community, that is a thing that we're known for. And I think just the fact of how big our labs team is and our entire focus of, of our role, I think probably is the easiest way to communicate to people that, hey, it's not just like, we're not just saying it. Like, it's very obvious that we care about the community. We care about making sure, if you have a problem, because I mean, computers are computers. There's going to be something that comes up, that we have your back, and that we're going to be able to take care of you and get you back up and running as fast as possible. No, have you turned it off and back on again? It's like, all right, what's the problem? Let's get you back up and running, and then we can address like what's the root cause. If it's a failed stick of memory, let's see if we can just pull that stick out, and then we'll send you a new one, and hey, you're up and running in the meantime, or things like that. Because to us, uptime is the number one thing. Very different from other SIs.
There's a few last things that I'd like to kind of quickly perhaps talk about, which I think you're in a unique position to talk about them, because there's the gaming versus creator PC is a big topic, but there's a few misconceptions and myths that people have about PCs, and I think you've seen a lot of these with customers and giving customer support, which would be awesome to hear. And one of the first ones is that, I want a better system, let's just throw more money at it, which might not be a good thing. The more expensive thing might not necessarily be the fastest thing for you. So do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I think we've touched on some of it in a few spots here, where like Intel Core or AMD Ryzen can be faster than Threadripper, even though the system cost can be thousands of dollars less. But that also comes up sometimes, like maybe Threadripper is the right thing, but 32 cores is going to be faster than 64 cores. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And it's going to be even more now with the new Threadripper Pros. They go up to 96 cores. I don't know how many workflows that's actually going to be good for. And it's a very expensive CPU. so like a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
10 grand.
Yeah. Expensive does not mean better. That's also very true with things like dual Xeon. We still get some people asking about dual Xeon because there are some of the bigger guys from system integrator side or workstations where, you look up like what, a Premiere Pro system from them, and they push dual Xeon, and frankly, it'd be terrible. You'd be buying a $15,000 dual Xeon, and it'll be beaten by a $2,000 Intel CPU system. So it's awful, terrible.
Do you know any scenarios where that dual Xeon is better than anything else for the same price point?
Not for video or photo.
Half the price point.
Not for this kind of stuff. Those dual.
I mean, is it for some scientific specific thing, or is it the RAM capacity that they need that they're gonna get, or which bit is it? Because it's not even 3D rendering, is it? Like when we're talking about V-Ray, Cinema 4D, Blender, it's not that gets the best performance either. It's, I believe, like Threadripper, we can get a little bit better And, you know, even you can get a few of these for that price and then slot it into that, or go to Epic is even cheaper. So which scenarios, I'm just curious, like.
So dual CPU in general, whether it's Intel or AMD, you know, Epic or Xeon, there's usually, I think, three areas where it's worthwhile. One is actually CPU rendering. So V-Ray, RenderMan, that kind of stuff, like Pixar level stuff. But they're doing that not because it is the best bang for their buck. They're doing it for density, because they want to get as much computing power in a 2U rack or something like that, because they care about density. And they have unlimited budgets. Like, you really think Pixar cares if like they could save 20% by going with multiple Threadripper machines? No, not at all. So that kind of like really high-end Hollywood level rendering is one. Two is going to be like anything high performance computing, so HPC. There's still a lot of like things like the oil and gas industry. There's still a lot of like some of their simulation stuff that is very well threaded, completely CPU based. So like they can get, again, a lot of times it comes down to density. There sometimes the cost can actually be offset because of how licensing works. Some of those things you're paying per license per system. Some of it is per core, but some of it is per system. So, and it's like this license costs $30,000. So like they're doing everything they can to get it down to per system. So HPC.
But wouldn't Epic have a dual socket as well? I think there's Epic dual socket as well, isn't there?
Yeah, Epic has dual. There's also quad socket stuff that's not very common these days.
Wow, it just looks like Intel Xeon, like they really need to come up with something, because AMD's really eating all of their like consumer base.
They are
very quickly.
And to be honest,
and Threadripper, both of them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because on the consumery kind of space, like Intel Core is terrific. Intel Core is awesome. I love Intel Core. Ryzen is often on par, but especially in like the creative community, QuickSync alone is just like enough to just set them above.
Yep.
Once you get up to the, I don't even know if you'd call it Pro or Workstation, because man, those like Intel Core and Ryzen are so good. We use them in a ton of workstations, so like that word doesn't really have a meaning as much anymore. But like Threadripper Pro versus Xeon W. Yeah, Threadripper Pro for almost everything. We do still carry some Xeon. It's primarily for specialized like machine learning or HPC applications where it's still done all on the CPU, and it requires like specialty AVX 512, like instruction set level stuff. There is still some that at the same time too, us as a system integrator, we never want to get our foot completely out of the door of different areas. And like Intel being Intel, like they've got a lot of resources. So we don't want to like abandon an entire space. So we do still carry that. It's the same thing with like AMD. We do carry a couple of AMD GPUs so that like, hey, we're still in the ecosystem. Like we don't use them nearly as much as NVIDIA in our systems, but we do want to keep that foot in the door.
Very clever as a business. There's a few other misconceptions. One of them we've talked about already, which is like the overclocking and stability, and then the like kind of stable workflow is very, very important for a lot of people. And then what about Windows 11 and upgrades and all of that stuff? I know a lot of things changed with Windows 10 and 11, and some of the CPUs and hardware wasn't even supported or working properly on the previous one. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so Windows 11 is probably one of our biggest number of support tickets, like in our support department. But interestingly, it's not Windows 11 itself. It's not Windows 11 being awful or terrible or giving problems. It's people wanting to upgrade to Windows 11 and then us helping them through that process. I would say at this point, Windows 10 and Windows 11, as far as like stability and like things working and application support, it's fine. Windows 11 is great. You can be using it. Like, I think right now we still offer Windows 10 on our systems, but I believe we're up to like 80% of our systems are Windows 11, which honestly, 20% of them being Windows 10 is a higher than I expected number when I looked up the actual rates. I think some of that is just people have, again, like an old plugin or some old software that like is vaporware. It doesn't exist anymore. No one's programming for it anymore. And so there's not new OS support. Some people just don't like change. They just, you know, there's always things to complain about in a new version of an OS when you're used to the old one. Some of it could be that. But really with Windows 11, the biggest thing that we see people having problems with is when they do an upgrade. So in-place upgrade, you know, you're in your system, you get that stupid pop-up in the left that's like, hey, you should upgrade to Windows 11 now, or schedule your upgrade. Or like, if you don't hit do it later, it'll just do it for you overnight. Those upgrades are the most common source of problems. So if you're on Windows 10, which I'll admit, my system is still Windows 10. I haven't had the time to switch over to Windows 11. But when you want to make that switch, the best thing you can do is back up all your data, you know, move everything like to an external drive or a secondary drive and do a complete clean, fresh install. It fixes most of the issues that people have with an upgrade. To be honest, a fresh install is something I think a lot of people should try to do every couple of years anyway. Like, I don't know about you, but my system just accumulates a bunch of junk. Like, I'll install an application, I'll try it, I'll use it for a little while. Even after you've uninstalled it, there's a lot of residual things that are just left. So honestly, that kind of a thing is something that ideally it's kind of like an oil change in your car, except you don't have to do it as often. Like, you should do it every couple of years. But so that's the biggest thing I would say is if you are going to be moving to Windows 11, man, really try to do a fresh install if you can rather than an upgrade. It's a pain. It's awful. You got to set aside basically a whole day.
Oh, yeah.
But it's worthwhile because honestly, I believe end of support for Windows 10 is in 2025. So we're only a couple of years out now from Windows 10 no longer getting updates. So yeah, you've got some time. Like if you're on Windows 10 now, don't stress, but start thinking about that because, you know, in a couple of years, that's going to come up faster than it should. 2025 seems like it should be way further out than 2 years. But definitely something to think about.
What I would probably add to that is if you're planning to upgrade your system, like before that or just around that time, don't upgrade it till then because you'll have to do that anyway at that point with the new system. Most likely you're going to go Windows 11. So what I'd say is just do it then, you know. That's why I'm on Windows 10 as well. I'm thinking I'm just going to run this. This is like 10th gen Intel. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to upgrade at some point, but until then, I don't have the time to just figure this out. I'll just run it until then.
Honestly, the biggest reason I'll upgrade it is to get rid of those stupid, you know, notifications of, you know, like, hey, you should upgrade. Biggest reason I would upgrade. Most of the stuff I'm doing don't really need any of the new features.
Mine says the funny thing that you should upgrade, but your hardware is not capable or like not compatible with the upgrade. I'm like, thanks, why are you telling me? You know, I know. The last thing I want to touch is Apple. And I know this is, you know, not in the PC industry thing, but I think Apple's been doing some very interesting thing recently that's been catching my eye that is like absolutely incredible. One of them is obviously their Apple Silicon, but there's another thing in there that I find extremely kind of not talked about, which is their media engines that are like hardware decoding, encoding for a lot of codecs. Like they build it for ProRes. They've been offering their, you know, card for the Mac Pro, I think for the Red Raw, and then ProRes as well, like actual media card. So they built like a special silicon for that. There is actually cards out there, believe it or not, for very special businesses and cards. You probably know that. I'm not saying that to you, but to other people that you know, do the encoding. I think AMD with their Xilinx acquisition, that's going to be very interesting because they've got some very interesting encoding and decoding cards coming out there. But what's your thoughts about Apple and what they're doing? Because it is very impressive, like a lot different than when they were on Intel. I mean, just looking at the M3 Max right now, they're getting like 14900K, 13900K performance on a laptop with like how many times less power consumption, which is insane.
Yeah.
I know there's their own downsides, which I'm like, please, like, fix these things and I'll move, right? But I'd love to know, like, your point of view as well, like what you're thinking about that.
Whenever Apple comes up, the biggest thing that I always try to make a point of is that PC, Mac, laptop, desktop, it's a tool. It's a tool. And just like, if it's going to do what you need it to do, that's what you should use. PCs are way better for some stuff. Mostly, like, think of anything that's like GPU accelerated largely. So GPU based rendering, virtual production, AI, a lot of the AI stuff, Apple can't compete at all on that kind of stuff. Like NVIDIA is the main reason, but like NVIDIA is just so light years ahead that, like, if you're doing any of that kind of stuff, the right tool is a PC. There are other things that Apple is absolutely the right tool. Battery life. Yeah, if you really need to be on the go and you need to, like, do some stuff while you're on the go, like on a bus or plane or whatever, battery life's awesome. Like you mentioned, some of the media engine stuff. If you work with a lot of ProRes, like, that one is one where, like, I push back a little bit because, like, ProRes is just so easy to work with anyway that, like, how many people are actually doing 12 streams of 8K
That's
ProRes? Yeah, whatever. Like, a PC can do 8 streams. Like, is it good enough? So some of that is like, yeah, it depends on what you're doing. But there are some codecs that, like, that the Apple Silicon is really good for. There are some, like
the 10-bit. Yeah, exactly. 10-bit 422. I think there's only Apple and Intel QuickSync that support that, hardware decode, not AMD or Intel. Yep,
exactly. And that's the main one for that. So a lot of that stuff, it just comes down to what is the tool. With the M3, that one in particular, I'm going to be really interested to see third-party benchmarks. Apple has been known sometimes to cherry pick a little bit. I'm not saying that that's Apple only. I mean, Intel's done that. AMD's done that. So, like, always I tell people, like, take all of those first-party benchmarks as a grain of salt because, like, it could be totally different once it gets out into, like, actual end users' hands. So, yeah, it just comes down to what you need. Yeah, if you need a mobile device, I mean, I have an M1 Air back there, and I love it. It's my daily, like, laptop.
I noticed that.
It's fine. I mean, half of our employees, I think, are working off of Apple laptops. The other half are on PC laptops.
Probably because of battery life, is it? Is the main thing battery life?
I think that one, because mostly, like, for at the office, like, everyone's docked, so it's not as much of that. I think it's just what people are comfortable with, because I mean, all of our employees aren't doing video editing stuff, or they're not doing game dev. They're on the website and, like, doing that stuff and helping our customers and doing stuff. So, like, really the platform for them really doesn't matter. So it's whichever one are they comfortable with. And cool, that's what it is. But yeah, when it comes down to, say, like, the Mac Pro versus a beefy PC, generally, there are some generalities I think you can make. One is, per dollar, you're going to get more performance out of a PC unless it is something that there's like special Apple magic. But at the same time, especially when you're talking mobile devices, I think Apple is, like, terrific in terms of, like, quality and, like, consistency and all of that kind of stuff. The other thing with Apple is you pretty much know what you're going to get. They have very few choices, which has the benefit of you rarely are going to spend more money and get worse performance. That is not the truth on PC. Like we've talked about a couple of times, it's very easy to throw money at something and it gets worse performance. But also with PC, there are so many companies out there that do it. I mean, Apple, you're getting an Apple. Like, it's made by one company. Everything is made by that one company. With PC, you have all the different system integrators. You have the people who make the motherboard are different than the people who make the CPU, who are different than the people who make the GPU. And that's a big part of our company, is making sure that all that stuff plays well together before it goes to the customer. And there are a lot of PC companies out there that don't put in that level of effort. Usually more common the smaller the company you get. So I think there is a lot higher chance of having a bad experience with PC because you got a system from someone who didn't understand those nuances of your workflow and your priority of reliability over gigahertz and that kind of stuff. So that's also something to keep in mind with PC is you have to do, you either yourself have to do a little bit more research of making sure you're getting exactly what you want to get, or you're working with a company like Pugetsystems so that they can do that research and legwork so that you're getting on par with Apple experience on the PC side. Because yeah, again, it's a lot more Wild West on PC.
One thing that you can add to that as well is like the upgradeability, which PC has like a huge advantage of, where Apple very, very much locks down and to me charges horrendous pricing for their SSD upgrades. For example, on any of their devices, it's I think, I don't know that stat, but I think the biggest ROI margin is their SSD and RAM upgrades. Probably they're making the most ROI, apart from selling the lightning cables. I think that's pretty beneficial as well for them to make some dough. But I think that's where they charge absolute premium for actually very, like in PC terms, like very low end, you know, product that shouldn't be that much. But apart from that, it is very impressive, and I can't wait to see like some of their, you know, the Mac Studios now as well, which is very interesting, a little bit different, something between the Mac Pro and the laptop, but someone who wants maybe the laptop plus performance, but not the Mac Pro performance in there. I think very interesting as well.
I guess I will, on the benchmarking side, just a final sharing is we are doing a lot of work right now of getting things out of beta, getting things more documented. So if you are interested in like exactly what we're testing, what we're doing, we should have more and more content on our website through the Puget Bench section as far as like what we're doing. But yeah, keep in mind that, for personal use, all of our benchmarks have always been and probably always will be free for you to just use. So, I mean, if you're looking at a review, like whether it's yours or someone else's or some of our content, and you want a little bit of context of, well, cool, you're comparing 14th gen to 13th gen and AMD, but I have a 9th gen CPU. And if you want to know, like, what would that mean for you if you were buying a new system, just download our benchmark, run it, and then you have your own number compared to what, like, you know, these reviews are saying, and then you know exactly how much faster a new system will be. So you're not like expecting a 5x in performance increase, but it's only 50%, or maybe you aren't expecting a lot and it ends up being a whole lot more than you think. So definitely give that kind of stuff a shot, because it really helps when you can test your own system versus what's out there on the reviews.
I just want to say big thanks for taking the time with actually having this big conversation. I'm going to split it into 2 episodes because it's way too long. You know, people, whether they're going to go and buy Pugetsystems or not, it's incredible that you still provide all the value to all the people. You know, if they're going to go with you or not, there's a ton of value that we just talked about in this video. So thank you very much for sharing that. And if you are interested in getting like the most stable, best professional Windows system for you as a creator, then whatever workflow yours is, there is some guy on Pugetsystems there at the customer service who's going to custom make it for you, talk it through. You're going to get the best experience in that. So highly go check them out. I'll leave a link in the description below.
Yeah, no problem. It was great chatting.
But if you want to build yourself a best bang for buck creator PC for whatever budget, then there's free build guides in the description below. Go check them out. Whatever budget you have, you can save a ton of money. I'll explain everything down there. Go check them out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon.